Inside Out 2 just came out and I wanted to talk about it. But first, I want to talk about the first one and Pixar in general. There are time codes in the description if you want to skip ahead to the part of the video where I talk about Inside Out 2, but you should probably watch the whole video because there's a lot of overlap on my opinions between these two films and necessary context about the studio that created them. I mainly talk about the time codes here so people can skip ahead to avoid spoilers. I talk about a lot of Pixar movies in this video and I didn't hold back from spoiling any of them. So first, let's talk about Pixar. I talk about Pixar a lot in my animation vs live action video, mainly how well I think their personification gimmick worked to their advantage. Even if these stories follow a bit of a rubric, the quality is so consistently high that I don't care. Also, as they got better at animating humans, they began to ditch the whole personification thing a little and start making some of their best movies. Up is my personal favorite Pixar film. It's my earliest memory of going to a movie theater, its theme was the first thing I ever attempted to play on the piano, a theme so good that no matter who you are, it's going to have a strong emotional effect. I know that the movie kind of peaks right at the beginning, but regardless, the film as a whole remains near and dear to my heart. And this opening scene is just so top-notch in every element of its presentation and storytelling. Up is my favorite Pixar film, but I think that The Incredibles might be the best one. I think the writing in particular is unmatched in Pixar's catalog. There are so many memorable lines and jokes, but more importantly, the family dynamic balances the absurdity of a superhero family with dialogue that sounds completely authentic to an American family, in a way that worked exceptionally for a kids' movie. Ratatouille is another favorite of mine. It's possibly the funniest Pixar movie to me. I love the way it pokes fun at how absurd the premise is. Monsters Inc. is great, with possibly my favorite ending to a kids' movie. Toy Story 1 and 2 are classics. WALL-E is adorable while simultaneously having a really great science fiction premise. These are all just great films. It's undeniable how monumental this company's impact was. Not only on other animation studios who have pretty much all adopted 3D animation at this point, but also on people. The media we watch molds us, especially when we're kids, but these films were so imaginative and well made that they also impacted adults. I really don't think any other studio was better at making an audience emote with their characters than Pixar was. But in my opinion, this all changed when they were acquired by Disney in 2006. The first film that went into production after Disney bought Pixar was Toy Story 3, which was a bad sign for where this studio was going, because it's basically just Toy Story 2 again. It's the exact same premise of toys being misplaced and finding themselves in a new environment, exact same structure with identical intros, same character conflict, almost identical twist villains who try to convince the main characters to stay with them and insist Andy's just gonna get rid of them soon, but then they turn out to be evil because of a sad backstory where they were unloved, and both end up with owners that they don't want after the climax of the film, which takes place on industrial conveyor belts. It's basically just the same movie again. But this time they made almost twice as much money and got a Best Picture nomination for some reason. So Pixar and Disney were like, wow, people loved it when we just rehashed one of our previous movies, let's just keep doing that. And this is not to say I inherently take issue with sequels, but all of the post-Disney buying Pixar ones seem to be so unnecessary and are so clearly spawned from a lack of originality and desire to take risks. If they built upon the previous movie's world in an interesting way and tried to do something new, I'd like them, but they don't. Finding Dory in particular is just such a blatant copy of the first film. Almost every scene is a reminder of another scene from the first movie. I just don't understand what's the point of this movie's existence. Incredibles 2 is the one that really irks me though, not because it's the worst of these sequels, far from it, but because I see the potential for this movie to be great. I want to see how the superheroes are seen differently after their success in the first film. I want to see where their characters end up. I want to see Dash, Violet, and Jack when they're older, maybe even adults, see new sides to their characters and what their lives are like, and how their relationships have changed. I want to see how the adult generation of superheroes react to getting old. We could have gotten a really different, new approach and it would have been great, but instead they just reset everything accomplished in the first movie so they could just recycle what made the first movie successful. All of the characters lost their growth and their arcs that they went through in the first film, so they can just do it all over again. Bob is unhappy and bored with family life again, except now he's rooting for his wife to die because he's jealous of her. Dash is more destructive and immature than in the first film, except now he doesn't have a reason to be that way. Like in the first movie, he wanted to prove himself, prove that he could be a superhero and do the things superheroes are supposed to do because he felt restricted by the fact that he wasn't allowed to be super. He's not just being immature when he pranks his teacher, he's trying to test his abilities and see whether or not he can do it without being caught. In this movie, he doesn't have that conflict, or any real conflict. He's just being reckless for no reason. And yeah, I know he's a kid, but I don't think most kids actually want to endanger people's lives. I really like his character in the first movie. So much so, I actually named my pet rabbit after him. But in this movie, he's just kind of an annoying maniac. Violet just fawns over the same boy she did in the last movie. Like, it's pretty clear in the first film that she successfully got with him at the end and overcame her shyness, but nope. No progress was made, her entire arc and conflict are completely reset. This sequel is just so annoying to me, not because it's terrible, but because it did nothing with these characters that I really like. Disney even just blatantly admitted that the name of the game right now is to be less artistic and original because their recent movies haven't been doing so hot financially. Like, they say that all pretty fucking blatantly here. I don't know what made them brave enough to release this, but maybe it's some sort of cry for help. I don't know.
We need more ideas. The cash chute is running low.
Ooh, what will we do?
Consult the idea machine.
Why I never?
Try beating it harder.
I'd give minimal credit to this amazing Psychic Pebbles animation by putting a link in the description, but it was taken off his channel for bullying, so I guess just go watch the new season of his show. It's very cool. Anyways, pre-Toy Story 3, we had one sequel. That's one sequel out of 10 films. Since they were acquired by Disney, their catalog is 50% sequels, prequels, or based on a previous film like Lightyear. The rest of their catalog to me ranges from alright and forgettable to fucking awful. My favorite so far has been Soul, but even that movie felt like it was kind of shying away from the real story it wanted to tell. It really felt like it was leading up to the main character accepting his mortality and doing the whole noble sacrifice thing, but nah. That might cause the audience to feel emotionally involved in the story, and we wouldn't want that now, would we? Consistent rules. Fuck that noise. My least favorite was originally The Good Dinosaur because it's one of the most bland, forgettable kids movies I've ever seen. But I decided to watch Elemental before making this video because it was the only Pixar movie I haven't seen, and that movie is such fucking garbage! I was immediately repulsed by how ugly these character designs are. Let's do some comparing and contrasting with the fire people in Undertale. Yes, that's the example I will be using because it's the only piece of media I could think of with fire people. You can tell things about all of these characters just by looking at them. Even though the designs are simplistic, that actually aids the character designs. Their simplicity gives them a defined shape and memorability. In Elemental, the fire people look terrible. The designs don't pop, they blend together, they're not stylized in any way, the way they move their mouths is super uncanny, and whenever they try to make them expressive, the results are so unprofessional. Just look at how bad this looks. The textures are noticeably worse than Pixar movies that came out 15 years earlier, the voice acting is terrible and unconvincing from the entire cast, the jokes are fucking abysmal, the comic relief character is one of the worst I have ever seen in a kids movie. There was a point where the puns got so bad that I actually started yelling at the screen.
We touched, and when we did, something happened to us. Something impossible. We changed each other's chemistry.
The music was unbelievably awful. We were really on the same level of composition as Up and The Incredibles with tracks like this. The premise is stupid and doesn't work at all as the allegory was clearly intended to be. The allegory itself about prejudice and biracial relationships is told in the most on-the-nose, unsubtle way humanly possible, without really saying much of anything, which just makes the whole movie feel so fucking insincere to me. The whole prejudice aspect feels like it was just shoehorned in so the main character would be more empathetic and have some easy-to-write conflict. It feels so cheap, and also so they could pad the running time with completely trite scenes like this.
Try these, straight from Fireland.
Dad, those are too hot.
I'm okay. I love hot food.
White people be like,
It's true. It's true. We're so lame.
The world clearly had no talent and effort put behind it because it makes zero sense, there's no consistency to anything, and it's boring as fuck. Remember in Zootopia how they showed animals living together in an interesting designed city? This movie does that, but bad. It may actually be the least interesting world building ever. Nothing is fun about the universe conceptually, which makes it extra terrible because the movie relies on the audience being somewhat interested in the world, but all I felt was frustration at how poorly thought out every single aspect of this world was. I don't understand, how the fuck did this get greenlit? What was the point of it being about 4 elements? There isn't a single air or earth character that matters in the story of this movie. Most of the conflict in this movie is completely forced and unmotivated. Characters will be angry for no reason, characters will be sad for no reason. The script just picks and chooses when it wants characters to react in a specific way to best aid the extremely formulaic conflict and resolution without making any of it feel organic at all. The third act misunderstanding trope in particular just comes out of fucking nowhere. There is no motivation for these characters' conflict, except because it says they're supposed to break up at this point in the plot diagram. Oh hey Ember, you see that screenplay over there? It says we're supposed to break up right now so we can come back together at the end. I guess that's just what we have to do. I don't care that this script is following a very basic structure. That's absolutely not the problem. The problem is that things only happen in this movie so it can fit that formula, not because it's motivated or makes sense in the context of the movie. They do the whole noble sacrifice trope again that ended up being a fake out. The water guy is able to come back for a reason so dumb, I honestly could not believe what I was watching. By the end of this movie, I couldn't think of a single character I liked or cared about. And I couldn't think of a single thing the 2 main characters who are supposed to be in love even liked about each other. Wally and Eve barely say a single word to each other, and their chemistry is a million times more believable. I was unaware that Pixar was capable of making a movie this dumb and insincere. Not a single element of this movie was a display of any talent except for a couple of environmental textures. It was one of the most consistently annoying movies I have ever seen, shocked by how horrendous this was. But for some reason, it seems like these one-off movies get extra praise. I guess it's nice that Pixar is making something more original than a sequel, right? Let's finally talk about Inside Out. Inside Out 1 was praised for being original, but honestly this concept isn't anything special. Having characters represent the inside of another character's brain is not that original.
As you can see, the brain is composed of many sections dedicated to emotion. Here is anger. Here is sadness. This here? We just don't know.
A lot of people were comparing Inside Out to Osmosis Jones, but it's just a very common trope in animation in general.
Hurry up! What do you think I'm paying you for? You don't pay me. We don't even exist. We're just a clever visual metaphor used to personify the abstract concept of thought. One more crack like that and you're out of here. No, please! I have 3 kids.
So the premise isn't original. How are the characters? Well, if you're asking me about the humans, they're just tropes. Despite taking place in her brain, I feel like I know very little about Riley. She's grumpy about moving. I've never seen that before. She likes hockey. Everything else I know about her is just so obvious and surface level, like she doesn't like broccoli. She used to pretend the floor was lava. She gets gum ads stuck in her head. She's just so fucking bland. And every character is like this. They're all just tropes, with nothing unique about them. Is a dad who's kind of busy with his job and therefore kind of absent, who also likes sports, going to be memorable? Of course not, because there's nothing to his personality that's anything more than a cliche. I mean, some people would argue he's kinda hot, but that's a whole different discussion. It also doesn't help that every one of these characters are apparently controlled by other characters, so that they're seemingly just like non-sentient robots. It makes it kinda hard to emote with them, which I would assume is the point of a movie all about emotions. So let's get to them, the real characters, the emotions. Surprise, surprise, characters who are written to act one way and one way only aren't very interesting either. Having one trait as if you're a Smurf or one of the 7 dwarfs isn't a whole lot of fun unless there's a more dynamic character for the basic ones to bounce off of. It also makes every single one of their reactions very, very predictable. A movie where characters experience the most overused conflict possible, like moving and having trouble making friends at school, and then having other characters react in the exact same way you'd expect them to react, is boring. That kind of a movie practically writes itself. Joy is the one character who isn't completely one-dimensional, which is obviously important since she's our main character and needs a little more depth to have a character arc. I like the way they portrayed her being overly controlling with the other emotions. I also like that her character design is really the only one with more than one color, and that color is blue, which represents sadness, which is the other emotion she shows in the movie. That was nice. I have mixed feelings on sadness. She has some funny lines and I like the voice acting, but a lot of the time she's just kinda irritating to me. Fear and anger also have their moments, but for the most part they're just way too one note to be interesting characters. And disgust is kind of a confusing inclusion. The other emotions make a lot of sense to me being like primary emotions, but I don't know, I just feel like disgust was there to fulfill all the other emotions that weren't covered by the other 4.
Won't it be great to be back out on the ice?
Oh yeah, that sounds fantastic.
Like, was that really a display of disgust or sarcasm? Bing Bong is the only character with any real personality. He also has my favorite vocal performance in the movie, but I was just kind of annoyed by how predictable it was that he was going to pull the whole sacrificing myself for the main character thing. I've never seen that before. It's just so obvious that he's not making it to the end of the movie the second you meet him. So those are our characters. Nothing really special about them or the premise, so how about the sequence of events? Is that innovative and interesting and really fresh and surprising? You know where I'm going with this, of course not. They do the whole character with another character they don't really like go on an adventure, and wouldn't you be surprised that by the end of the movie they learn to like one another? I've never seen that before. But Michael Mann 2000, how do they get back to headquarters? Well, they try to use the islands of Riley's personality to get home because they have passages to headquarters, but wouldn't you know it, the island crumbles down so they miss their way back. It's just so obvious, like, you know, at the low point of this movie, all these island things are going to be gone, and they're going to have to use a different way to get back to headquarters. So to act like these characters had any chance of using them to get back is just kind of annoying. Like, I know when they try to get to the next island closest to them, it's going to fall right when they get to it. So to see this happen multiple times is just really repetitive and predictable. Also, why do these islands fall in any order? Why don't they just all fall at once? What is making them fall only once the characters get to them? So movie can happen? It's very convenient and dumb. What is supposed to be happening when all the islands are gone? Is the implication that nothing defines Riley's personality at this point in the story? That she's a completely blank slate? They eventually try the train of thought, yes, as a new method to get back to headquarters, but then it gets hit by one of the islands, and now Riley doesn't just have no personality, but she also has no thoughts? Okay. So Joy tries to abandon sadness and get back to headquarters by herself, but it blows up in her face. I've never seen that before. I want to make it clear that my problem is not necessarily that this movie has tropes and cliches. Cliches are common in writing for a good reason. Most ideas have been done many, many times. And if I really felt like these cliches were somehow bad in it of themselves, then that would make all these other movies bad too, which is not the point I'm trying to make at all. But a movie like Spirited Away, which is about a little girl that's grumpy because she's moving, is then told in a wildly inventive and imaginative story. Inside Out is just one cliche after another, and it feels like that's all the movie is. If there were some less obvious beats to the story, it would be fine, but there really aren't. Let's talk about the comedy writing now. Humor is usually one of the most important parts of a kid's movie. Particularly since Shrek, we've gotten a lot of animated movies that are funny for adults while simultaneously being funny for kids and child-friendly. And while there were some funny moments in this movie, a lot of it was pretty bad. There's a deleted scene I found online that's like 2.5 minutes long that I think actually made me laugh more than the entire movie. I'm not suggesting that they should have included this scene in the movie because it has a completely different tone, but I think this tone is something I would have preferred.
Boy, she sure is excited about Take Your Daughter to Work Day.
I didn't know she was so interested in my job.
No school! No school, no school, no school.
What's Dad's job again?
No idea.
This is gonna be awesome!
Other news, San Francisco's intractable homeless problem continues to vex residents.
There you go. Now you can help me look for words that are misspelled. Oh, there's one. It's shouldn't have an apostrophe right there. This is what Daddy does every single day.
The references to other movies aren't funny to me.
Come back here! Forget it, Jake. It's Cloud Town.
The making fun of San Francisco and its hipster culture isn't funny to me. However, most of the movie's humor is just puns, and from the Elemental discussion, you know how I feel about those. There is some situational comedy I liked.
I won first place!
Me too! Oh, participation award.
But why is it that something like this works and this doesn't? This participation award joke kind of reminds me of this joke from the Lego movie.
I want to go home! This is not what I meant!
It's quick, fits the way the character's day is going, it feels like the world is mocking them, and that absurd kind of misfortune is funny. Just saying, this is the train of thought, get it? It's like that common expression, is just really obvious and kind of lacks the punch a good joke needs. I'm talking a lot of shit on puns right now, and yeah, I think it's really irritating in a lot of kids' movies. The B movie is basically just 90 minutes of B puns and it's torture for me. But this is to say, I actually really like wordplay when done well. It can actually be really funny, and I'll give you some examples. I find Norm Macdonald hilarious, and he's known for telling these sort of old school jokes and somehow finding a way to make it funny, which is fascinating to me. Oftentimes he would make guests on his show read these awful puns.
In my opinion, if we're going to fight the war on terror, a good place to start would be our country's haunted houses.
Most famous is probably his moth joke. I'll put a link to the 7-minute Conan O'Brien interview in the description. Yes, he spent 7 minutes building up to a single stupid pun, and that's what makes it so funny. He is so shameless, he is willing to spend his 7 minutes of live television fame to waste everyone's time with a dumb joke. And this isn't the only time he did this, but the reaction is always something like this.
Good God!
I know, that was way out of line.
No, it's like somebody saying, I gotta show you something. They take on a 4-mile hike to show you a dog turd.
The context is what makes it funny, but so does the audience. And it doesn't have to be a real audience, it could be a character reacting to the bad puns, and their irritation will make the bad joke funnier. Another thing I love that's full of wordplay is a show called Xavier Renegade Angel. I know this looks horrible and disgusting, and it kind of is, but stick with me here. This whole show is kind of made with the intention of making it as weird as possible and pushing what they were allowed to show on television. Like, the fact that this played on cable TV is kind of a meta joke in and of itself. But more importantly, the show's dialogue is just non-stop wordplay.
I'm a survivor. We're a dying breed.
There's an episode where the main character does a standoff with himself, and they both just kind of say insults that can be interpreted as themselves insulting themselves. It gets confusing. Here's a couple of my favorite lines from it.
Look at you. You look so superficial. You probably judge things by their physical appearance. Are you so dumb you even answer rhetorical questions? I don't know. Do you?
This show is dumb, unapologetically so, but that sort of embrace of stupidity makes these jokes really funny to me.
Friday night is Taco Tuesday.
This week, instead of eating tacos, let's just talk. Oh.
I wish there was more dialogue in the world like that. After that, we get a group therapy session with this gang who clearly have the most inauthentic accents in the world.
I guess I tend to use my switchblade as a defense mechanism.
Oh, that puppy is the cutest thing in the world. And it's like, I'm standing right here, Mom. I'm standing right here.
And then some of the jokes are actually wildly clever. There's one episode where there's mini tornadoes being held captive as slaves by an evil scientist. Never seen that before. Yeah, I'm being genuine this time. And at the end of the episode, they escape and Xavier says this.
It's an uprising. We've got to suppress revolutionary movements.
Uprising is both a political uprising and uprising wind patterns, and revolutionary movement as in a political revolution and revolutions in wind creating tornadoes. It's one of those things that's really clever but doesn't draw any attention to itself, and the show is full of stuff like this. Jokes that aren't really said differently to any of the other dialogue, and therefore are so easy to miss, but if you're paying full attention to this nonsense, they reward you with subtle jokes like that. Okay, that was a long tangent. Anyways, wordplay can be very funny, but it's hard to pull off. It's rarely funny when it's obvious, not really clever, and just sounds like the characters are doing one-liners, which is most of the humor in this movie. There are good things about Inside Out. I already talked about liking Joy's character design. The character designs of the emotions are good in general. The animation is good in general. I like the animation in the abstract thought sequence a lot. Sometimes the character's eyes will look a little too shiny and lifeless, but for the most part this movie looks really good for being almost a decade old. The music's kind of bland for the most part, but I will say the main theme is one I remembered and I think really works well in the movie. There are emotional moments that I think were pulled off pretty well. I like the message about the importance of feeling all emotions and not trying to shun them. It's a good message for children. The scene where Joy is unsuccessfully able to deal with Bing Bong's emotions, but then sadness is able to make him feel a lot better, is something that I think a lot of socially oblivious adults could learn from, and I think it highlights the movie's themes really well. But, for the most part, I just think it's really unspecial and predictable, so not really a very enjoyable movie for me at all. I will also kind of always be annoyed by the fact this won over Anomalisa for Best Animated Feature, a movie that's so well written that the characters feel far more like real people than most characters in non-animated movies. That movie is kind of incredible, and it's amazing to me that the movie with nothing really new to offer other than some Reddit tier puns beat it out. If Anomalisa is so good, why isn't there Anomalisa 2 yet? Ah yes, let that be the transition to the second Inside Out film. For Inside Out 2, instead of saying my criticisms first and then saying what I liked about the film, I'm going to swap the order and say what I liked about the film first. I appreciated that they didn't reset Joy's character. I talked about how much I hated it when the other Pixar sequels did that, and they made it very clear from the beginning that that wouldn't be the case in this movie. Joy is also still the most complex character in the film, which isn't really saying much, but it's still appreciated. The voice acting was still good despite the recast, which I barely noticed. There are a few points where Joy sounded kinda sarcastic, but other than that the voice acting was very professional. I can't say that for all Pixar movies anymore. Animation is noticeably better than the first one. The storyboarding really stood out to me at some points. I actually thought the movie was a bit funnier than the first one, even if a lot of the jokes are still just really annoying puns. There are some genuinely funny character dynamics between the main 5 emotions. There was a couple of visual gags that got me. I thought it was funny when the emotions made Riley cry for 3 seconds for basically no reason. I thought it was funny when Riley tried to break into a locked building and the door was locked, but then she tried the door on the left and it wasn't locked. What was the fucking point of that? If they wanted to make a joke here, then maybe they should have had her try to break through the window or something first, only to realize that the front door is open. The way they have it is very awkward, but also very funny to me. I have mixed feelings about the music, but some of it is very good and seems reminiscent of Carter Burwell, who's one of my favorite composers, so that's a plus. Some of his movies seem to be about the inner workings of the brain, so maybe that's where the inspiration came from. That is, if they were inspired by him. I don't know, I'm making an assumption here. There's some really generic rock music at the start of the movie, but it set up a fun tone. Also, if you've been to a hockey game, you'd know that they're full of generic 2000s rock music. I really didn't like the sappy piano music they play during the third act of the film. It's just such an overused way to score the end of a film, and I'm just so sick of it. Not to say it can't be pulled off if you know what you're doing, but this ain't it. There's just no character to it. I've heard this soft, high-pitched, widely spaced out chords piano song so many times. Expecting this to make me emotional is like expecting this to make me scared in a horror movie. It's not gonna happen, it's just so overused. I guess I've transitioned to my criticisms already, so I guess I'll get into my first real criticism, which is, why? Why was this movie made? They essentially told the same story again with the same message. It's not quite a carbon copy like Finding Dory or Toy Story 3, but like, this movie's message is to better understand the purpose of negative feelings and know how to balance them. Exactly like the last one. Changing that emotion from sadness to anxiety changes things a little, like the conclusion is more about learning how to handle anxiety rather than learning to embrace sadness, but I feel like ultimately the message is too samey. The sequence of events is also too samey. Join sadness, now joined by anger, fear, and disgust, go on a journey around Riley's brain but are met with many obstacles. I've never seen that before. It was cool to see Joy's character arc be completed at the low point of the film by her tearing up by staring at the memory balls and realizing the value of bad memories. I've never seen that before. The structure of it is a little bit more logical this time around, since the obstacles are more so created by Riley's feelings, but it also just means whenever the writers need conflict for the main characters, they can just write some stupid pun like sarcasm or the brainstorm. Like so many recent Pixar movies, it just kind of feels like they throw things in to work as conflict because the screenplay requires those story beats, but more often than not they feel really cheap because the conflict isn't really set up. You shouldn't be thinking about 3-act structure when watching a movie. And I feel like if you are, it's probably because the movie's boring and or it's following that structure rigidly and unnaturally. I can't possibly imagine the 5 emotions from the last movie are going to get back to headquarters before the second act is over, so the entire second act loses all tension for me. If it wasn't so obvious to me what the second act tension was, or if the second act tension itself was more fun, I would have enjoyed it more, but that wasn't the case. For the most part, the entire second act of the movie was just a slog for me, which is a problem because that's where the drama you're supposed to be invested in goes. There's some fun moments like the 1984 reference or the Parade of Jobs. There was a section with some mixed medium animation, kind of reminded me of Smiling Friends. The sequence itself is very clearly there to set up something for the end of the movie and to break the characters out of the bottle, which, by the way, they made a joke where they're bottled up emotions. And then a second later, another joke that they're suppressed emotions. You're pushing it with the first time around, but to basically make the same unfunny joke twice? Come on! In general, this movie is just way too predictable. I don't understand how it benefits children to make a predictable movie. It doesn't necessarily make the movie easier to follow, it just makes every beat of the story unsurprising. Kids love Star Wars. The whole I am your father scene is so famous because no one was expecting that shit.
I am your father.
No! Kids like films with twists and turns, everybody does, and if you're good at writing screenplays, you can set up things clearly without making it so obvious where the story's going. I can't see this pouch thing without immediately thinking it's going to be used near the end of the second act, and so all I see is a plot device. When the characters are like, this is the red notebook that the hockey coach keeps all her thoughts about us in, it's so obvious that Riley is going to try to look inside it. Red is just that standout color that makes you know it's coming back. Here's S.J. Clarkson, director of hit film Madam Web, talking about this very thing.
I watch so many films all the time, but you know, Nick Rogue's Don't Look Now.
You know?
Yes.
I mean, isn't that
The red,
amazing?
right?
The red,
yeah.
there you go, the red. That's why the red umbrella, and obviously her character's in a red outfit. Inception, Memento, you know, Christopher Nolan, just brilliant. And you know, so I went back through sort of everything, and even back to some of those 70s films, The Conversation.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Yeah, no, I went deep and broad, you know what I mean, on all of these things, yeah.
I was literally expecting her to compare Schindler's List to Madame Web in this interview. Have you seen the movie you made? That was a tangent. In general, the format for both of these movies is just really boring for me. Mom does something that's obviously gonna make Riley mad, and then anger touches the console, and Riley acts mad. Then something is obviously gonna make Riley sad, causes sadness to touch the console and make Riley sad. Then something that's obviously gonna make Riley grossed out causes disgust to touch the console, and then guess what? Riley gets grossed out. How could I have seen that coming? It's so boring. There are parts of this movie where I wish the emotion characters weren't in it. But I guess that just leaves you with the humans, and boy, I wouldn't enjoy that. Riley is still bland as fuck. I thought maybe in the first movie, her emotions and headquarters had non-specific designs in comparison to her parents because her personality wasn't as defined yet, but no. We see inside the heads of other girls her age, and what they got going on in their brains seems a lot more specific to their characters. Riley is just so uninteresting, which is an even bigger problem in this movie because it spends a lot more time on the human plot, which again is about as tropey and basic as it gets. Riley abandons her friends to fit in with the cool girls. I've never seen that before. She lies about things she likes to fit in. I've never seen that before. None of the humans feel like characters. They're all so basic and forgettable, and I don't feel like they talk like real people at all. They're just tropes to fit with the narrative. The cool girl, the nerdy best friends, the embarrassing parents, the tough coach, the adolescent who's just trying to fit in. If they fleshed out the characters more and gave them some fun specificity, then they wouldn't be so boring. But they didn't, so they're all just cliches. The human characters in Toy Story served a very similar purpose to Inside Out. You know, the whole they don't know about their sentience and their involvement in their lives, but their main goal is to make sure that Andy/Riley is happy and that they're not forgotten. It's part of why I don't find these movies to be particularly innovative. But unlike Inside Out, while Andy is boring, the side characters in Toy Story are actually pretty memorable. Sid is a unique and memorable character. He has memorable traits like his shining carpet or the way he sleeps with his butt in the air. Al in the second movie is funny and memorable too. So is the guy that repairs Woody. I have more interest in this guy than Andy, which is fine because at least then we have a few characters with quirks. But in Inside Out 1 and 2, we don't get a single character like this. The only memorable moment between two humans is this off-colored sex joke from the dad. If you're gonna make jokes of this caliber, then maybe make them about the whole premise of the movie, which was supposed to be puberty. I wasn't really expecting a joke about menstruation or something, but at least that might have been relatable for some little girl going through this transition. Believe it or not, there are subtle ways to implement subjects like that into kids' movies. The whole puberty thing felt like they forgot about it 5 minutes after they mentioned it. Can't Riley want to fuck a jock or something? Sorry. Where's the horny in this group of emotions? I'm kind of joking because this is a kid's movie, but in all seriousness, can't she have a crush on somebody in this movie? A lot of people are thinking Riley might be gay because she only thinks about this cool hockey girl, but honestly it feels more like she's Ace to me, which very clearly was not this movie's intention. Even the emotions in her head have more of a pulse than she does. Like Fear has kind of a crush on anxiety. That's kind of fun. Sadness seems to like embarrassment. Disgust wants to fuck that video game character that was put in through mixed medium animation.
Ew, ew, ew.
Speaking of, I should probably talk about the new emotions. Anxiety works as a villain, but I don't have much to say about her other than that. Envy was never funny and clearly just there so Anxiety had someone to interact with. Embarrassment has an arc where he learned to be less embarrassed, which is about as dumb to me as if Sadness learned to be happy. I thought the whole point of this movie is to better understand the value and purpose of all emotions, even negative ones. This seems like it's missing the point to me. Nostalgia and boredom feel particularly pointless. In general, the new emotions are kind of a confusing inclusion. It just kind of feels like they're splitting up the original cast. Like, anxiety is pretty much just fear, so what's the point of adding these secondary emotions if they basically just serve the same purpose as the original cast? It just makes it confusing. Why weren't these characters in the parent's brain in the first movie? Is this movie implying that before puberty, no one will ever experience anxiety, envy, boredom, or embarrassment? I just wish this movie did something different, but that would never happen because doing something different means risk, and risk means box office failure, and we know they're not going to take that chance. Every movie has to be the exact same from now on so we can most easily mass produce them. I hate how easy it is to disassociate your own emotions with the emotions of the human characters because you know that they have no control over their own actions, and you know that the main 5 characters won't experience any consequences for her actions. I really fear that this was an intentional choice. Being emotionally involved in the story, that's stupid. And every character has to be as watered down as humanly possible so everyone can vaguely relate to them. Any specificity is discouraged. Every single movie has to be as watered down as possible so we get an uninspired blob that everybody kind of likes, but nobody loves. I never got the impression that anybody working on this movie really wanted to make it, and now I basically have an article that proves it. Again, what a fucking anti-art stance to take. Jesus Christ. I really don't know how you can make a more unenjoyable film than Elemental for me, but we'll see how low this company can go. If this is the mindset, I think we got some real stinkers in store. And I will be ready to tear these children's movies apart that were made by thousands of people from my comfortable armchair. See you in 2 years when Toy Story 5 comes out, but for now I'm done. Peace. I made a ranking of all the Pixar movies on my Letterboxd, so go follow that if you are interested. I'll update it whenever the next Pixar movies come out. I am finally done with this video. It took forever. Anyways, I'm sure there's some Pixar fans who are going to disagree with me in the comments. I don't mind that at all. I like when people continue the discussion in the comments, even if I disagree with them. Movie discussions have to have opposing takes for the commentary to be interesting. Anyways, like the video, subscribe, all that, you know, whatever. Goodbye.